Seems she has intercepted a transmission of unknown origin. She got us up to check it out.
A transmission? Out here?
Yeah.
What kind of a transmission?
SOS. I don't know.
Human?
Unknown.
Hello and welcome once again to the IMMP podcast from the Inter-Millennium Media Project. My name is Matthew Porter.
And I'm Ian Porter.
I'm his dad, he's my son, and just in case you haven't joined us before, I make him watch movies and television and read books and listen to records. I introduce Ian to media from my youth, way back in another millennium, back in the 20th century, and then we find out, what does Ian think of it? Coming to it often for the first time. What do I think of it coming back to it sometimes decades later? And we decide, was this worth our time? We give you some tips at the end whether we think it's worth your time. And in general, it's a chance for me to
continue to show me stuff that you shouldn't have watched as young as you were when you saw it.
That is true. That is true. I have not subjected you to things like the Poseidon Adventure at the age of 8, but yeah.
Yeah. But you mentioned things I haven't seen before, but can we get a probability there, Mother, about the chance that I've seen this one before? Can it do that calculation for us?
I think that is a very, very high probability.
That's a high probability
because
for
I know
us
that
on
I've shown it to you before.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is another in the long list of episodes of our podcast that we already watched together and kind of inspired us doing the podcast, because you've been doing this for a long time. The new part is the recording it to let everyone else join in.
That's true. Although we say new part, it's been about 5 years now.
My goodness.
Isn't that hard to believe?
That is astounding.
But we're turning today to a movie that made, I say this a lot, but this made a very big impression on me. Partly because of when it hit, partly because of the circumstances around it and when I got to see it.
Oh, boy.
And this was a fun one. And I also like the fact that, unlike most of the movies that we revisit for this podcast, we got a chance to see this on a big screen.
We did. This is a movie that still gets some play in theaters and such. I've heard of it multiple times, and the fact that there are more in its series coming out soon means that it's coming through theaters again. But this one comes in and out of theaters since it's been released, honestly.
It does. And this re-release in particular was a 45th anniversary celebration.
Yes.
45 years since this movie was released. And I think this was the first time that I've seen it on a big screen since its opening night in 1979.
Oh my goodness.
And that was a fun experience. And we're talking about Alien.
Alien.
By Ridley Scott and Dan O'Bannon.
Such a classic, just aesthetic, let alone, yeah.
So much influence on a certain branch of science fiction.
Oh boy. Absolutely. Because I almost can't figure out where to start with Alien, because it is, I mean, this is a Library of Congress cultural significant thing. This is a 1,000 films have been launched with the "it's like Alien but blank."
Yes. It is genre defining in that way. It defines
exactly.
a certain subgenre, or did for a long time. And I think that's because in film, it was something so incredibly distinctive at the time. You could trace pieces of it back through science fiction literature, I think. But you think about science fiction in the 15 to 20 years that preceded it, putting aside horror that happened to have a science fiction gloss on it. We had the gleaming, pure white and black polished surfaces of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was like, let's take the Apollo program, but more so. And then, of course, we did have Star Wars, but yeah, Star Wars was knights and princesses with ray guns. It was not really science fiction. It's not putting Star Wars down in any way, but it's hard to think of it really in terms of science fiction.
Star Wars is fantasy.
Yes, absolutely. Alien, it took that idea I mean, 2001 gave us the impression that space is a place where people could work. Alien gave us the impression that space is a place where people have jobs.
Yeah.
And get stuff done.
If 2001 showed that people can work and live in space, Alien said, and they get paid hourly.
Yes.
There's something like just a little bit more rough. There's something more lived in. The fact that the polish is gone, the fact that the screens are flickery, the fact that everything is a little bit more rough and tumble out there. It has such for being a futuristic story that it inevitably has an advanced technology angle to it. There is something very analog about space in Alien.
Very tactile, very physical. And to the extent where, and we can talk about this in more detail later, they sort of separate the computer and digital aspects of what they do from the hands-on stuff they have to do. In an amateur press association I was involved in around, not long after Alien came out, somebody referred to this as the grubby baseball cap school of science fiction. And I thought that was very evocative. That's sort of the feel this has. This is, it's about coveralls and sneakers and dirty baseball caps and engine rooms and getting stuff done. This is not set on a ship of exploration. This is not set on a warship. It's set on a truck. It's a tugboat.
Yes.
It's hauling around a refining platform. It's commerce. These are rough.
Yeah, this is the Pork Chop Express in space.
Yes.
For anyone who is a fan of Big Trouble in Little China, like I am.
Yeah,
it's got that same kind. Jack Black would absolutely fit on the Nostromo.
Jack Burton would have absolutely understood these people.
I said the wrong person.
I don't know. I think Jack Black could play a character in the Big Trouble universe very, very well.
He could play, and he could probably play something on the Nostromo too.
Yeah, I bet he could.
Chances of him being another one of the androids is higher, though.
So just seeing this movie in 1979, it was kind of a revelation. It was something new and different. And I love the fact that the movie revels in that. This is not just kind of the background. This is a movie that takes its time and lets us see them getting their work done when they have to descend to the planet that they have to explore because of an unknown transmission that they receive. We get a long, long sequence of their approach and landing. And I wouldn't remove a second of that. I love all of in one sense, it's that thrill of watching competent people do something they're good at because they've done it a million times before. And it's also just fascinating to see all the tactile and physical things like you were talking about. And
there's a lot in Alien in terms of the structure, which is a setup and knockdown. It takes a remarkably long time for them to actually get to the horror and the being chased and the danger on the Nostromo and the action parts that people remember of this movie.
Yeah.
But that's because if they didn't spend a long time making you feel like you know the place and the people, every single thing that is taken away wouldn't have value.
Right.
There's a concept in sales of let the customer hold the item, because if they hold on to it for long enough, the idea that it could be theirs becomes more intense. And so this lets you settle in. It lets you have a favorite place. It lets you have a place you're not as fond of. It lets you relate to the people. It lets you dislike some of them, like they're your coworkers you don't always get along with on something or something. It works very well of establishing that and putting the camera almost as an extra crewmate. And then, now that it's yours, I'll take that back now, and I'll take that, and I'll make this thing you like hurt.
Yes.
And that's such an interesting psychological game to play with your audience.
Right. It puts us in that ship. It makes us part of the crew. The way it's shot, the way it's filmed, the way the performances are just so naturalistic There's nothing heightened or elevated about the performances where we're in space and doing space science future things. No, these are people who want to get home. They're annoyed that their trip is being interrupted. They're complaining about what shares they get once they get back and they get paid. And like you say, we get to have favorites, and we get to have people who annoy us, and we get to feel like we're a part of this, and therefore it has value to us. And then, of course, it is threatened. So yeah, I wouldn't remove a single second of the setup until we actually start to see aliens.
Yes. And it also gives a chance to this is a ship built of Chekhov's guns in that sense too. So many things come back later.
And yet it never seems very telegraphed.
It doesn't.
Always, when it pays off, that's when oh, that's right. They forgot the such and such. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. The cat.
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah. And, this has been said before, once you get the aliens or once they start to explore, then it really is a haunted house movie in that you've got an enclosed space, people who have no way to be anywhere else. There are scares and there are dangerous things, and they have to decide to what extent are they going to hide from them? Are they going to go out and tackle them and approach them and destroy them? And you get the people are picked off one by one through various things. Although it never becomes routine, it never becomes boring, because all of the responses that people have are very believable.
Yes.
They are smart people with certain resources trying to solve a problem.
There's actually there's a lot of problems, especially in horror films, of the character's intelligence is inversely proportional to their distance to danger, which means they do the stupid thing when they're in the most danger, which is attempted to be made kind of realistic via panic, but sometimes it's too much.
Right.
Honestly, they do a decent job where some of these trained professionals in their panicked situations are panicking, but they know how to do certain things, and they are desperately trying to do their specialization really well.
Right. And they're not trained in exploring or fighting monsters. They're trained in operating a tugboat. But that still means that they have technical proficiencies and they have ingenuity and that they're able to do things. And all of that is believable. There are times when, in the classic thing that happens in haunted house movies are, you want to shout at the screen, no, don't open the door to the basement, you idiot. Mm-hmm. There aren't really any of those moments in this because no one is ever really being an idiot. There are a couple of instances like when Harry Dean Stanton has to go and chase after the cat so he doesn't lead them on false trails anymore. And he wanders a little bit too far from the others he's working with. I find myself thinking, really, you shouldn't be doing this. What is wrong with you? And yet they've already established this is not the sharpest person on the ship. Yeah, this is the kind of thing he would do without thinking about it too much. So it was still believable, and I never got to the point where I thought the characters were being idiots. They were just being who they had already shown themselves to be.
Exactly. There's no loss of proper characterization during that.
Yep.
And the foolish mistakes they make feel like they're foolish mistakes.
Right. They weren't conveniences for the writer. They were foibles of the characters. Mm-hmm. Or, as we learn, intentional decisions of the characters.
Yeah. That's one interesting thing. In the original film, because it's interesting, so much of Alien for me is not this film. It is the franchise.
Yeah.
By the time I was coming out into the world and being aware of media, it like the third film in this franchise came out in the year I was born. By the time I was aware of it, the fourth film was out.
Yeah. And
it's so fascinating to go back and see the first one because a couple of things. Mm-hmm. One, while the whole corporate has betrayed us and used us as expendable aspect is in this film, it is such a future danger and later problem, and the survive is so much more a focus.
Yeah.
That it is not the heavy hit of messaging that I'm used to in this franchise.
Yeah, that is that being betrayed by your corporate overlords is, you're right, it's a factor in this, it's a plot point, but it's not a driving force, really. It's what set things in motion long before we knew.
Exactly. The other thing is the fact that Sigourney Weaver, who plays our lead, Ripley.
Yes. Warrant Officer Ripley.
She is so good.
Oh, yes.
And she is such a driving force through this film. And she is very understandably, I would say, the main character.
No
and she's the main character in a lot of the other films as well. Mm-hmm. But by the time I knew of it, the face of the franchise, the main character of everything else, is the alien.
Right.
Is the xenomorph. And so in this weird way, I can find a dozen pop figures. I can find anime figurines of the xenomorph. And there's some for Ripley, but there's a lot less. And so it's this weird thing of like, the alien in Aliens starts out by grasping onto somebody and out of them bursts another alien. And it's like Ripley survived this, but pop culture did not. Pop culture got grabbed by a facehugger, and 1,000 pieces of alien merch with the xenomorph on it have burst from culture's chest in the wildest way. Because when I first was aware of it, it was purely, what's that big creepy black thing that's sneaking around and looks like it's made out of pieces of people? And, oh, you mean the H.R. Geiger sketch? No, I mean the thing next to it. Oh, a xenomorph.
Yeah, in seeing this in 1979, when you think about it, the xenomorph, the alien, does not appear on screen very often. I don't know if anybody's counted the screen time, but it's surprisingly scant screen time, and that keeps this thing creepy and mysterious all the way to the very end when we see it a bit more than we had before, because it's always mysterious, and they keep us in the position of the crew enough that for most of the movie, almost all the movie, anybody who sees the xenomorph, that's the last thing they see.
Yes.
So nobody gets a really good look at it, and neither do we until the end when someone finally survives an encounter with it.
And I will say, the really good look we see is it falling out of a cubby.
Yes.
And it's not the most graceful moment for this creature.
No. It was not a costume in which it was easy to do a lot of acting, I think.
There's a lot of this movie that is from 79, but it feels like it's from mid-80s. There's things they're very good at. One thing I'll give the Alien franchise, and Alien here specifically, is it always feels like it's a movie from a couple of years later than it actually is.
Because it had such influence on those movies that came after it. It was the first of something that kept going.
But the few moments we get to see the full alien costume is a little cheesy in the way some of the movies we've seen that are slightly older is, where there's like bodysuit kind of gangly nature.
And
in the wrong right lighting, I could have seen the xenomorph showing up in Lidsville for one moment and it not being out of place.
Yeah, he's a cousin of the football helmet guy.
Kinda. He's got that kind of look at times.
And you're thinking about the alien designs and the various parts of its life cycle we see. The chest burster alien, seeing it on a big screen again, 45 years after I first saw it, yeah, that looked a little cheesier and more puppet-like than I had remembered. Yeah. But at the time, it was such a shocking scene and so unexpected and so gruesome that the last thing any of us were looking at was how good is this puppet. It was shocking, and they kept it living and organic just enough, and yet still a bit weird. But yeah, the not all of the costumes and all of the props in the xenomorph aspects and the alien aspects necessarily hold up.
That's one of the interesting things we were discussing earlier, how graphically this is so much more an analog, and it's honestly a dusty and kind of gritty location.
Right,
And
yeah,
by
it's full of grease and dirt. It hauls refineries around, yeah.
By establishing that early, they're able to make something that is slick and shiny. They're able to take plastic with a coating of Vaseline and make it seem so out of place and creepy.
Yes.
And it's that same sleek shininess that in things like 2001: A Space Odyssey is used to make the pods look futuristic and advanced.
Mm-hmm.
And so it establishes that this creature is advanced, is futuristic, is powerful in that sense. And contrast it with a grittier, grimier space travel. And so even though it's killing all these things, that little bit of visual shorthand means the idea that, oh, the corporation wants this thing is so easy to understand.
Yes, it's so different and powerful.
Yeah. They hand the alien, this biological thing, all the markers of science.
Right.
According to visual design. And that's such an odd thing to do, but it's part of what makes it work.
And speaking of the design, something I'd read about this, I never tracked down the details, so it's been a while since I heard this. But there are production designers designing aspects of the movie. And there were designers working on the Nostromo and the human, the Earthling elements of the movie. And then there were designers working on all the alien things, the planet where they find the alien eggs, the different phases of the alien. Of course, a lot of this was designed by H.R. Giger, and an enormous influence there. But then they had other designers turning this into things you could use in a movie. What I've heard is that Ridley Scott made sure that these two groups were absolutely separated.
Yeah.
They had absolutely no cross-influence on one another. The people working on the aliens had no idea what the design was going to be like for the human spaceship, and vice versa. So that when these come together, they were absolutely not aspects of some designer's unified vision for the movie. They were different universes clashing, and that shows. And that kind of stark contrast is part of what makes it scary. Like, this is not from here, and it is trying to kill us.
Absolutely. Ridley Scott just does a great job in general. He has this film. He uses the hallways, and if you're watching for it, you can see the same set repeated. Mm-hmm. But shown at different angles for different parts.
Right.
But by using the exact same location, it makes the place feel winding and big and complex.
Right. And that kind of repetition is not in any way surprising or not in keeping with the setting. One corridor in one passageway in a merchant ship is not going to be that different from another.
Right. But there's things where he's using the doors to frame shots. Yeah. I'm thinking about the scenes in the air vents where sometimes where all the zoom is close to make it feel tense and claustrophobic in there. But when we get to an open area, the camera gives it space.
Right.
To add to the tension. Or, of course, the chase in and out during the escape pod sequence where the hatch used to get in and out is framed by the corner cuts of the doors all the time. Yeah. Which makes it this big open area. So when Ripley's panning around watching, there's space to be paranoid in. And that's some of that aspect of design element where when we see the ship where the alien comes out of, the full of all of these eggs and such, it is shown partially because for matte painting, but it's shown pulled out and gigantic.
Right.
Which means all those tight corridors that crop in on the frame and such, it feels alien to have that much space. Mm-hmm. And so even there, the camera is working alongside the spatial design to take what we've got and pull that difference into the forefront even more so. Right. So what you're saying about like keeping these two things separate, that goes as deep as the camera doesn't treat them the same to make sure they feel separate and different. Mm-hmm. And And when the camera pans out in our claustrophobic human spaces, that's a sign of the alien
Yeah.
being a threat, because it's treating our space as its space now.
That's
because
interesting.
it's taken over.
It's moving through the human ship with all of its sharp angles and compartmentalized spaces, but it's moving the way that it could have in its own spaces, which were big and curvy and no sharp angles.
And the camera is respecting who's in charge.
Yeah.
When Ripley gets a leg up on it, when she takes over, the camera starts cutting in close, cutting in tight on stuff, and it gives her the sharp angles of human ingenuity against its wide open, space-filling authority.
I like that.
So, like, Ridley Scott's there using
Yes.
cinema as shorthand in all sorts of ways as well. This is a film where I feel like if you were to turn off the audio and if someone had never seen it and they didn't watch it with the audio at all, you'd still follow the story 100%.
Yes. And thinking about the way things are presented, the way the camera movement, the way the camera placement is used, there are a lot of places in this movie where Scott gives us information secondhand, or lets us see something secondhand in a way that it both puts us in the position of the characters, but it also limits the information we have to make things a little scarier. We learned a little bit about one of these as part of the discussion that was the intro to the movie for this 45th anniversary re-release, and Scott talking about the fact that partly because they couldn't make the alien ship model as big as they wanted to, they shot it in 16 millimeter and then showed it through a TV screen, and we see it through a TV screen the way the character Ash is watching it.
Yes.
And that the fact that we're distancing it through several layers of technology makes it look bigger, because we understand, okay, this is small because we're watching it on a small CRT monitor. This thing must be huge. In the same way, we have so many things where there's a conversation going on, and we hear at least half the conversation through the crackly intercom on the Nostromo, or through the interference of somebody's suit radio when they're out on the surface of the planet. And the fact that we aren't just hopping points of view all the time, we're not always getting the clearest version of this information, and we're not always getting the information from the point of view of the person who is closest to what's happening, is a part of that use of the visual and the audio storytelling to create that mood and give us that sense of who's in charge when.
There's just so much about how this is built in that sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the design in this movie. We've talked about it. We mentioned H.R. Giger. Let me tell you a little bit about how I came to this movie in the first place.
Yes. Tell me about that.
1979, I was in, I think, 7th grade. Science fiction nerd, science fiction fan.
Okay.
Huge, devoted reader of Starlog magazine, which was a magazine devoted to science fiction, film, and television.
Okay.
And this was a big deal for Starlog magazine. The fact that this major studio hard science fiction movie that also had aspects of horror to it was on its way out. So for months and months and months, it seemed like a year at least, but maybe it wasn't. I just reread these magazines so often. Starlog was talking about and writing about Alien for so long before this, and they had in-depth things about Ridley Scott, about the design, and in-depth things about H.R. Giger and all of his artwork and the things that he had done and how he connected with Ridley Scott to work on this. For all I know, they even mentioned Jodorowsky's Dune, although that meant nothing to me at the time. And while I read this, I was fascinated. I was captivated. But I always knew I'm not going to get to see this movie. This is an R-rated movie. This is a violent horror movie. My parents are not going to let me see this movie. So I was fascinated, but at the same time, I was a little bit forlorn while reading all of this, because I knew I was never going to get to see this. And this was before I could even count on ever being able to see it on videotape. And then it came out And I must have rambled to my dad about this from time to time as well, or he just saw me obsessing over this in this magazine. Because opening night, the movies were opening on Wednesday nights back then. On opening night, my mom had something going on where either my dad and I, my older siblings were all off doing things. My dad and I had to amuse ourselves or make ourselves scarce or something. And he said, let's go to see a movie. Let's see that new movie you were looking at.
He did?
So, even though I was, 13 years old, in 7th grade, he took me to see Alien, this R-rated movie, on its opening night.
Oh, my goodness.
And this was just the most amazing experience. First of all, my dad, absolute hero for this. Second of all, I was like the absolute hero in school the next day because all of my friends who had been reading Starlog magazine had not gotten to see the movie. Most of them did not long after that. But that was probably the first movie I had ever seen on opening night. And the fact that I went from being fascinated by this, by knowing I would never get to see it, to actually watching this movie, I honestly don't know how much of the movie I was really able to take in, because just the experience of being there and seeing on a big screen these things that I had been reading about and seeing little pictures of in Starlog was such an overwhelming experience. But that definitely colors the way I feel about this movie.
Oh, of course. This is the source of a point of glory for you.
Indeed.
Oh, that's amazing, though. I also am just thinking, because when we went to see it, there was this part of the theater doing this presentation. They had video from newsreels at the time
Yes.
about kids to go see it. I can just imagine you there going, "Oh, I was one of them."
Right.
Because it's like the local news station. Did you enjoy seeing the movie, Timmy? Yeah. Are you going to sleep tonight? No. Was it worth it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was on the Alamo pre-show, this local Texas news item about parents taking their children to this R-rated sci-fi movie.
And that's the thing. It's an R-rated movie, and I wouldn't say it's lacking graphic nature. My goodness, it's graphic.
Yes.
We have not been following specifically the plot of the story, but we're also kind of assuming and talking about it as though you've seen it.
Yeah, more so than some of the movies we talk about. We're kind of assuming everybody has seen this at least once.
The graphic nature of space helmets getting melted with acid, the graphic nature of the chest burster bursting at people, the graphic nature of having to learn one of your coworkers is a robot and beating them to death with the fire extinguisher to get them to not kill another officer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very graphic, violent moments, but I would never say that it revels in any one of them.
Right.
It shocks with them, and even then, the characters are disturbed, and it is not normal.
Right.
And so there's something very real about this violence is because this is a terrible moment. But if you can contextualize what's going on, it never feels unearned or trivialized. And that's,
Right.
I think, important.
The violence is very stark, and it is portrayed very naturalistically. They portray these unnatural things in a very naturalistic, dispassionate way. And that makes them more horrific in some ways. But also, like you say, it doesn't revel in it. You never get the idea that they invented something just so they could have something gory on screen. No, they have a story, and points in the story have horrible things happening to people, and they're not going to shy away from showing those as part of telling the larger story. And that sets this apart from a lot of pure horror movies, especially of the kinds that I don't care for, in that everything is driven by the story, and the story is by and large driven by the characters.
Yes. So would this R-rated film be scary and disturbing? Yes. Would it be hard to understand? Would it be hard to process? Would it be hard to learn good things from? No.
Right.
It is a story where, in the face of horrible things happening, which are horrible and are treated as such, ingenuity and skill and trust are the keys to success. So in the weirdest way, it has a positive message. at the end of a creepy, disturbing story.
It's a story of survival. Ripley does survive. Nobody else does, just Ripley and the cat. And the cat survives thanks to Ripley. She saves the cat at the end.
She saves the cat, absolutely. She gets to be the hero character.
And yet everyone else, I shouldn't say everyone else, the characters are all different. It's not just a group of people who are all stalwart in the face of adversity and one of them survives. Some of them are smarter than others. Some of them are braver than others. Some of them are interested in going out of their way to protect their crewmates than others. And all of that is established very early, and everything everyone does is consistent with that. Yaphet Kotto is a terrific character. He's playing one of the two engineers, and he's the guy who's always complaining about the bonus situation. And we should be getting a full share, and that's all he wants to talk about. And yet, he's interested in fairness. It seems to me, he's not just greedy. He sees a situation he thinks is unfair, and making it fair would get him more money, and he does care about that. But you see that interest in fairness when he does put himself at risk for the sake of his crewmates later on. And that's not inconsistent. People can show different sides of themselves and still be a consistent character. Exactly.
The movie Alien is a very human story.
Mm-hmm. It is. And even Tom Skerritt plays the captain, Dallas. In some ways, he's the least interesting character.
In some ways, yeah.
That's because the job he has to do is the least interesting. He's the manager and the guy who makes final decisions. He is not there to be super creative. He is not there to micromanage what other people are doing. So it makes sense that he is in some ways the least interesting. And Tom Skerritt's still a good enough actor to make him a character you care about and a character you're interested in following.
Exactly. And even there, I said that, I'm so used to the franchise having a lot more of the corporate bad aspect. Mm-hmm. But even there, we get the corporation shown in the bits it does as the people who don't have to bother with being here.
Right.
The people who get the benefit without the threat.
Mm-hmm. They just send others out to be expendable.
And so even there, we're getting personality and characterization for the corporate bigwigs up top. And they kind of get treated as a character, a character who is not there to be threatened and be in danger, but who still has a characterization like everyone else, flaws and nature like everyone else. Mm-hmm. And it has to be factored into what's going on.
And you think about the influence of this movie, I think, in terms of the evil technology corporation aspect of this. Nobody had heard of cyberpunk, really, in 1979. And yet the seeds of that were planted, not just in things that Philip K. Dick and others had written by then, but in this movie and maybe Rollerball, this idea of a world that is so influenced by corporations with their own non-human interests that affect the lives of people who have to deal with it. This set the stage for things. And you talk about influence on cinema, there's such a line from Alien to Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, where you've once again got destructive or dangerous robots. You've got corporations with sinister motives and inscrutable motives.
It all ties together very well there.
Yep.
And in some ways, because it does such a good job in the first film, is why things have to become bigger and different in the later ones. The Alien franchise, to talk on the larger scale, is good at making each film a different type of film.
Yes.
This is a haunted house. The next one is a different thing. The one after that's a different thing. They all are different kinds of films.
Yeah.
But the problem also is Alien is very good at wrapping it up, which means every sequel has to have a reason we are running into these things again.
Yes, yes.
And that means they have to lean on making the company more knowledgeable and worse every time, which is part of where they get this increasing reputation across cinema, and part of why the Xenomorph is such a iconic character despite having this not too much screen presence before, is that more and more of its skills, abilities, and everything else, and what it can do and what makes it dangerous has to be established later on as it gains new tool sets to deal with the new type of movie it's put in.
Right. And that's one of the things that's really interesting in getting your take on movies like this, because you had the experience of coming to this when it was already part of a franchise, as opposed to this was something brand new and you had to figure out how to relate to it, as well as just taking it in as a piece of art. And that's such a different experience. It's always interesting to hear that.
Yeah, for anyone seeing this the first time, even then, I'd known what the life cycle of a xenomorph, of the alien is. So I knew what the face hugger that jumped on the guy was going to cause next, and what's going to happen. I already had some of that from cultural osmosis. And I can only imagine when you've got nothing, when the poster doesn't even show anything of the creature.
Yes.
And your first encounter is this thing leaping onto a guy, and you're like, oh no, how could this get any worse? Oh no, how could it get any worse? Oh no.
Everything remained so mysterious from the beginning. What this transmission was that led them to this planet, what this alien spaceship is, and they were never very clear whether alien intelligence had ever even been encountered or proven. They were on the lookout for it, so they had protocols for dealing with unknown transmissions. But was this the first alien spacecraft that anyone had ever encountered? It happened to be ancient and derelict. But the fact that we didn't know that, they didn't, as you know, bob us on it.
Yeah,
I liked that, because it made things mysterious for the characters, also made the environment mysterious for us.
I always took it as we've encountered structures, but we've never encountered beings.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah, they're impressed by the size, but they're not surprised by the existence of it.
Right. That it even occurred to them to ask, was this a human transmission or not?
Yeah. But the fact that it's transmitting seems to be surprising.
Right.
So I imagine going to go mine a new planet because you find something and there's an obelisk on it. And you're like, well, there's got to have been something.
Yeah.
But it ain't here now. Okay. But when you find an obelisk and it's broadcasting 102.5 FM, you're like, oh, what in the world? That's different. Go check it out. And that's the sort of scenario they had.
It makes sense also why there's a science officer aboard this space truck, because they're going on a really long voyage and you never know what you're going to run across when that happens. Maybe publicly it's for things like goodwill, and the corporation gets to tell the public in its commercials that it's investigating the universe, even as it finds new minerals for prosperity on Earth. And of course, they're really sinister robots trying to find weapons, but,
Yeah.
multitasking.
Exactly. Multitasking at its finest.
That's right. Well, I think we might be approaching our final questions.
I think we are. In the meantime, though, we send out all sorts of transmissions that you can go investigate. Dad, where can they find your broadcasts?
You can find me at bymatthewporter.com, and you'll find links to whatever else I'm doing online. And that includes my YouTube channel, where you will find a variety of things, including the Draft House Diaries, which document all of my visits to the Alamo Draft House cinemas, armed with my Alamo season pass. And Ian, where can people find you?
I can be found most places as item crafting, be that itemcrafting.com or item crafting on Etsy, as well as item crafting at bluesky.social.
And if you like the IMMP podcast and you want to support us, you can do that by going to immproject.com. And that's where you will find a link to our shop, where you can buy t-shirts and coffee mugs and notebooks and all kinds of fun things like that with various designs. And where you will find a link to our Patreon if you would like to support us there, or just follow us there. But if you support us on Patreon, you get additional audio content. If you support us at the movie club level, you get additional audio content plus a surprise DVD in the mail periodically. And if you just want more of the Inter-Millennium Media Project, in addition to Patreon, on IMMproject.com, you will find all of our back episodes, more than 140 of them at this point.
Oh, yeah.
And also,
Okay.
one more note about IMMProject.com. We would love to hear from you. If you want to contact us, there's a contact page there, which gives our P.O. box, as well as a contact form where you can email us. And you can also find us on our Discord, which is linked at IMMProject.com.
Come join us. Tell us about when you saw films. Tell us about films that you think Dad might have seen that he can suggest to me. Tell me if you think that I was wrong about something, or if there's something that I should have thought of as well when comparing something. Hey, I would love to know when you first knew about Alien, and if you knew about Ripley or the Xenomorph first.
And also, let me know if you've ever seen Dark Star.
Oh, goodness.
That's an O'Bannon movie that predated Alien, and in some ways it was a very cheap sort of trial run for some of the ideas in Aliens, and pretty funny too.
Ooh.
Well,
So,
final questions. It's a movie, so screen or no screen?
I gotta say screen on this one.
Yeah, I mean,
Alien
that's-
is so good.
That's a given. You can't. It is such a great movie and such a pivotal point in movie history. You've got to say screen and get the best transfer you can. See it on a big screen if you can. It might still be available in this re-release when this podcast drops. So take a look at your local theaters. It is well worth seeing. Well, that question was easy.
That question was easy. The next one is tricky.
It is. It always is when it's already been answered by history. Because
Yeah,
our next
because
question is revive, reboot, or rest in peace.
And it is a franchise. In
Yes.
fact, it's had Aliens, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection. It's had its prequel stuff like Prometheus,
Yeah,
which are all, I'd say, extremely different films.
they are.
I almost feel like the Alien franchise will eventually somehow achieve every single subgenre within its own shared world. Like, I'm waiting for the romantic comedy about a pair of people stuck on a Weyland-Yutani ship that fails to boot up its systems after cryo sleep. And it's just kind of a more awkward and slightly more creepy version of Passengers, but it works. They could do that, and the fact that they could is wild. So, I mean, this even has crossovers with the very popular and completely separate at this point Alien versus Predator, which is its own entirely other thing.
Yeah, they took a little Easter egg that a designer decided to throw into the background in Predator and build movies around it. I have not seen any of the Alien versus Predator movies. I don't know. I mean, maybe they're fun, but they just seemed like they were insults to both Alien and Predator.
And I don't know either, but it's fascinating. So in my mind, I don't think I am saying revive or reboot because I feel like it's doing that to itself constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I can judge then saying, should it have been revived? Should it have gotten sequels? Yeah, I like Aliens a lot. I thought Alien 3 was pretty good. After that, we should talk. But yeah,
I'm
it's
excited for
certainly-
the new one coming up soon.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. So I have no problem with them using this as the jumping off point for additional movies. And I think at least one of those we'll probably talk about on the podcast in the future. As for additional sequels, you know, like you say, I'm interested in seeing what I make of Alien Romulus. More interested in that than I was in Alien Covenant, which I never saw because I didn't care for Prometheus very much. In some ways, it's a more interesting question of whether there should be a remake. Mm-hmm. Should there be a remake of Alien? And I don't know that there should be.
If you were going to, my thought is, because I like pitching like the alternate idea.
Yeah.
If you're going to do a reboot or a remake, I'd say do a remake that is not a new version. Tell us the exact same events of the Nostromo, but give it to us from the perspective of our robotic, not so much buddy, the science officer.
Huh.
I want to see Ash's perspective.
That,
I want to see an android fighting with himself between the fact that he likes his crewmates and he's programmed to follow company orders as everything goes down. And you can even play with the question of whether or not he was aware after he got defeated and if he was at all conscious or doing anything. Because the idea of after everybody did that and we ran off trying to deal with the alien, and something like some other part of the system just lumbers over, picks up the head, and wanders off because he does something else in the background, is this odd little remake parallel story that I think could be fascinating.
That's an interesting idea. I'm not sure I'd have the patience for a feature film length of that, but it's an interesting approach. It certainly is the most different that I can think of.
I'm also thinking of it because it would put when Alien first came out, the audience had no idea what this was.
Right.
By now, there's 7 movies. There's all this other stuff. There's a wonderful video game, Alien Isolation, which is like playing through 2 entire more Alien movies on your own and getting that in person, which is an excellent game. Putting your audience as the one character who knew the most about what was going on actually puts them in line with what they'll know culturally sitting down to see the film. And that's part of where I get that idea from.
That's interesting. Yeah, as remake ideas go, I like it. One of the reasons why I don't feel the need to see a remake of Alien is that in some ways that's what Prometheus was.
Yeah.
It was in many ways retelling the same story, just dumb. And, well, maybe I'm being too harsh. But, you know, there's nothing in the original I want to fix or that I think would be improved by telling it differently. So, yeah, a different point of view like you're suggesting, that's the one way in which I think it would pay off. I like that.
Thank you.
As far as sequels, we've talked about the fact that, I like the fact that Aliens exists. And yeah, I guess I don't have a very strong answer because I'm fairly content with the way things worked out, at least early in the franchise.
I think it worked pretty well. The biggest thing for me being a fan of a lot of different video games is that Alien has so many spiritual sequels and successors in a lot of great video games. The original Metroid and all of its sequels were heavily inspired by the movie Alien.
Oh, yes.
Games like Dead Space and We Went Back and so many of what I like to describe the genre of something has gone wrong on the space station, which is an entire subset of video games I love to play.
Yes.
Are so influenced by this. One of my favorite tabletop RPGs of all time, Mothership by Tuesday Night Games, is directly designed to allow you to play through stories like Alien. Right down to the fact that you'll sit down with a table of friends and only one of you survives at the end of it, if you're lucky, is part of how the game enjoys running itself.
Yep.
There's a lot of other things that took inspiration from how Alien presented this kind of horror and was able to use it to tell dozens of hundreds of other stories that are all fun and interesting.
Yeah. And some of that comes from the fact that it is such a concrete setting. It just seems so real. You can believe people live there. And that means a lot of different people can live there, which means a lot of different stories can happen in this kind of setting. It's not one big gleaming setting that has this overarching storyline about an empire or princes and princesses and knights, or this one intrepid crew going off to explore Jupiter. No, it's a place where a lot of people have different jobs.
Yeah. By the end of this movie, the Nostromo is the no more. So it has to have a wider world to have more going on.
And that's one aspect of Prometheus and some of the other movies that I do like, which is getting a bigger sense. We have the sense of the world in which people live and work, the world that's right in front of those people. We do get a sense of the larger world in which a corporation like Weyland-Yutani operates. And that they don't give us too much, but they give us enough to make that interesting and make it plausible that there could be this powerful corporation.
Yes. I just love that.
Well, I so enjoyed showing this to you. I so enjoyed getting to show it to you on a big screen like I saw it 45 years ago.
It was so fun to see it on a big screen.
And we hope that you enjoyed this, listeners. We certainly enjoyed talking about it. And again, if you did enjoy this, or if you have other opinions about Alien or the Alien movies, let us know. Go to IMMProject.com and you can contact us there. In the meantime, that's all for this episode. And we will be back in a couple of weeks with more tales from the 20th century and its world of media.
And in the meantime, go find something new to watch.